Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. We really appreciate you coming over here. I know there were some technical challenges getting here and even finding the room and everything. So thank you for not losing hope and going through all the hoops and making it here. So the One Summit Regional Day is something we started a while ago, and it's our effort acknowledging the challenge of everyone getting maybe on the same global event. We know there are restrictions on travel and some challenges. So instead of you coming to us sometimes, we come to you. And we bring these events to different locations and hopefully serving the local community. And here in China, we have a very esteemed local community of open source contributor to our networking and edge project. So really appreciate it that you are here today. We have an agenda that is packed with very talented speakers who've been contributing to our communities and projects for a while now. So I encourage you to stick around and listen. I think they're all excited. I hope to learn a thing or two today, so hopefully you will be able to do that as well. I will start by kicking off by giving you some updates from the Linux Foundation side, and then we'll have many of our community members speak about topics related to open source networking and edge. The way we're going to do it, we're going to have presentations, but we'll also try to keep some time after each presentation for Q&A. So please take this opportunity that you're all here in the room physically together. Don't be shy. Ask questions. If you feel more comfortable having conversation in Chinese, I won't be offended. Go ahead and feel free to do so. Whatever works for you. I know it was maybe challenging for some of you to get here, to take in flights or trains or whatever. So again, really appreciate you being here, and please let's try to make the best of this day. I think we have a good amount of participants here, well, while still keeping it an intimate forum. So again, don't be shy, ask questions, and participate because we're all here for you. So with that, as I said, I'll say a few words about the state of open source networking and edge, and then we'll move on to the rest of our speakers. So for those who don't know me, I'm the CTO of Networking, Edge, and Access at the Linux Foundation. I joined the foundation about 18 months ago. But some of you remember my face from open source project that I've been working on, contributing to for the last 6 or 7 years. I've been a contributor to OwnUp and a few other projects. So, about, as I said, 18 months ago, I decided to make open source my day job and join the Linux Foundation after working for Samsung, Nokia, Alcatel-Lucent before, and contributing to open source projects on behalf of these companies. I'm going to say a few, remind you about the Linux Foundation, speak about how different verticals are using and leveraging open source projects, and then kind of try to predict the directions that we're all going to. So if you made it here and still don't know what the Linux Foundation is, don't worry. I mean, it happens. So everybody knows, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Linux Foundation and already contributing and active in our projects, but if not, many people are familiar with the Linux operating system that maybe started the whole thing a few decades ago. But these days, as you can see, there's dozens and hundreds actually of open source projects that are hosted by the Linux Foundation as the neutral platform. What you can see here is just a very partial list of the logos of the project. And as you can see on the left side, we have projects, open source projects that address the needs of various different industries and technologies. So if you're doing web development, if you're familiar with web development, you know about Node.js. If you're doing something in cloud, you are familiar with the CNCF probably. And of course, if you're part of a networking and edge communities, you are familiar with our projects, but there are also projects related to energy production and distribution, and even film. So Hollywood is a big user of open source software these days. So many of the Hollywood films that you see these days are using a few of these open source projects coming from the Academy of Software Foundation, especially around the special effects creation. So I want to say a few words about industry verticals, because we see that different industry verticals or domains are adopting open source. And this is a recent Forbes article, and it's kind of trying to predict what would be the important technologies going forward, especially after the pandemic. And what they, the conclusion that they came to is that both 5G networks and edge computing are critical for many different industry verticals. They see it as a crucial thing, 5G, either private 5G or use of public 5G for building the enterprise networks and for building the applications that are required by many industry verticals such as healthcare, manufacturing, telecom of course, but many others. And what we're seeing in our communities is that, I know it's kind of a busy slide, but bear with me. So the top layer is the different industry verticals that are adopting open source software. And as we move from the left side to the right, on the left there is more serious adoption of open source. So things are already happening in industrial manufacturing, industrial IoT, energy, and commerce, especially using our LF Edge project. But as we move to the right side and the different verticals, we see more and more adoption of open source technology there. And when we look one layer closer at who's driving this adoption of open source, we see it's been driven from different industry players. One is whoever is building enterprise networking, whether the enterprise themselves or communication service providers that are serving the enterprises, they're pushing and adopting more open source. Then there are their service providers, either network service providers or cloud service providers, public clouds. And then we see more recently like end users, and especially government end users, maybe especially in the US, pushing for the use of more and more open source as a way to create more secure networks. And then at the bottom, what you see here is just a few of our projects in networking and edge that are enabling this adoption of open source technology by the different industries. So you probably, if you are involved in some way in networking, you know that the networking world has been driven for many years by standardization. That was the methodology that enabled industry to move forward, enabled interoperability between vendors, and enabled network designers and builders to build a network that is composed of components from different vendors. This process has been going for decades, and some people kind of get confused when we talk about open source, saying, oh, is open source going to replace standardization? So the answer is no. What actually happens is that our open source communities are working closely with those standard bodies, and what they're doing is they're creating the open source reference implementation alongside the creation of the standards, which leads to a more efficient process of developing the standard because there is always a reference implementation. So what we're actually seeing is that open source is accelerating and assisting in the development of the standards, and there is kind of cross-pollination between the standard bodies and the open source communities. So trying to kind of look more into the future, I'll try to say a few words about what we're observing in our communities. I think the trend that we're seeing clearly is that while open source for networking and edge is not new, and open source communities have been building the different building blocks for open source implementation of networking and edge computing for years now. And they've been doing a very good job at providing the different building blocks. But what we're seeing is that people in organization are starting to ask, okay, how do you put all these different building blocks together and build a solution? So there's a lot more interest in integrating different open source projects together and also integrating them with the rest of the network, because maybe not everything in the network end-to-end is open source. We have to be realistic. So people are much more interested these days in how all these projects integrate together. And if we look at our edge communities and edge open source projects, we kind of map them across two different axes, the vertical and the horizontal. So on the horizontal axis, we see that our edge projects are serving different kind of edge computing. So I think there's no more talk about far edge, near edge, because everybody understands it's not a discrete type of different edges, but more of a continuum. So the same technology can be applied for very close to the user edge, but in many cases also closer to the cloud core in a kind of a continuum. And this is how we see our project as serving this continuum of user edge to the closer to the core edge. And on the vertical axis, we kind of categorize our open source projects to projects that are dealing more with the edge infrastructure, things like Akraino that provide blueprints for edge, and projects that are dealing with specific use case and applications for those specific industry verticals that I mentioned, whether it's retail or manufacturing. And if we double click into the Akraino project that I showed before, you can see that with time we're adding more, or our community of Akraino is adding more and more use cases for different industry verticals, whether it's industrial IoT, mobile edge computing, a lot of things related to data, and we'll probably see more projects coming in soon related to data and machine learning and artificial intelligence. Another area where we see a lot of interest is network as a service, or more specifically, how communication service providers can provide network to their enterprise customers in a way that is more self-consumed and self-managed with high degree of automation. This hype around network as a service has started about in the last year or so, but we see a lot of interest and a lot of activity in especially in our networking communities around providing a higher degree of automation that will allow communication service providers to provide this network as a service to their customers. Now, I've been speaking for a few minutes now and I didn't mention AI enough, so here it is. Of course, there's huge amount of interest in any industry these days around artificial intelligence, and we try to kind of analyze what does it mean for open source networking and edge. And after doing so, we went through a process with our community members, with our board of director members at the Linux Foundation Networking and Edge. We surveyed our project members. And the conclusion that we came to is kind of shown here, is that the AI for networking or for edge is actually sort of a layer cake. At the bottom, there needs to be development of new projects and technologies that deal with the collection of the data. So that's the bottom layer there. And this needs to be domain specific. So Linux Foundation Networking and Linux Foundation Edge need to take care of how to generate the data on which the AI algorithms will work. But then as we go up the stack, there's a need for data governing and sharing technologies. And that, we believe, is quite common between edge, networking, healthcare, energy. So the Linux Foundation AI and data is dealing with that, and the communities under this foundation are developing all those, what we call horizontal technology, that is relevant to any type of AI domain or AI applications. So we don't kind of compete with them, we don't step on their toes. Everything that is not specific to networking and edge is being developed by the communities of the Linux Foundation AI and data. But as we move up the stack and we talk about AI models that are specific to networking and edge, of course that's again something that our communities are going to deal with. And at the top layer, of course, the applications that are using AI and machine learning. So if you think about network optimization or edge resource optimization for machine learning or federated learning at the edge, all these things that are specific to networking and edge will be developed by the LF networking and LF edge communities. So it's a kind of a sandwich, if you like, of technologies where in the middle we will be using technologies that will come, generic technology that will come from LFAI and data. And of course, all this talk about AI leads us to kind of looking at the future of networking. And if we look at the next G, the 6G, it's obvious that AI will play an important role in 6G networks. So our current work that we're starting around AI networking will pave the way for open source project that will support 6G. We're still seeing a good amount of interest in many of our networking and edge projects. You can see here the trend is obvious. So obviously there's still growth of interest in contributing and participating in open source projects. So we still see a positive trend. Security is something that we started paying attention to in the last year or two. And what you can see here is kind of a dashboard that is provided by the LFX, if you're familiar with, but it's the Linux Foundation dashboarding that provides open source project a way to measure their security posture, measure their vulnerability using different tools and scans. So we keep an eye on the security posture of our projects, and we also see many of our open source projects investing time and effort to harden and secure the software. And about a year ago, we published a white paper speaking about all these different efforts and methodologies on securing software. The good thing is that it can be used, those methodologies can be used by any software project, not just open source. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that experience of our open source community in their quest to harden their projects. And as I said before, this interest in project integration led to something that we launched quite a while ago called the 5G Super Blueprint that some of you may have heard of. So the 5G Super Blueprint is, as the name suggests, a kind of a blueprint of blueprints that provides an architecture of how different open source technologies can be used to provide an end-to-end solution. The main or the initial focus was around 5G, although these days we're looking a little bit beyond and even to fixed access and networks that are not necessarily 5G, but the concept is the same. The concept is building these blueprints of different open source projects and showing how they can be integrated together to provide a solution. So this is a kind of community-led effort that is ran by our community members who are bringing all these different solutions and integrating them in some of our labs and showing how it can be done, documenting it so people can learn from that. One project that you may have heard of has been getting a lot of attention is Nephew. Nephew is a management and orchestration project for cloud-native network functions. It was created initially under Google Cloud, but was contributed to the Linux Foundation last year. Basically, in a nutshell, Nephew is taking well-known concepts and constructs from the Kubernetes domain, like resources, custom resources and operators, and applies them to management and orchestration of network functions. And it applies the same techniques to managing the network functions, managing the infrastructure, and managing the configuration of network functions. So the advantage is that it's a one tool that does all, so you don't have to use 3 different tools with 3 different languages or skill sets to manage your infrastructure and network functions. And the good news is that Nephew is now in the final stages of joining the Linux Foundation networking. So it started as a standalone Linux Foundation project, but these days the board of directors of the Linux Foundation networking is in the process of accepting Nephew as the Linux Foundation networking project, which will make collaboration with other Linux Foundation networking projects much easier. And Nephew just released a few weeks ago its first release. So it focuses on the orchestration of cloud-native network functions and using those principles from the Kubernetes world. And this first release also included some kind of a user experience sandbox that allows people to experiment and create all these custom resources and operators for their network functions. And of course, it's just the first release, and there's a lot more to come. And the Nephew community is open for more contributors and collaborators. There are already more than a dozen companies contributing, but the community is open for more and would like to benefit from your experience and contributions. Another project that made a major step recently is Kamara. Kamara, for those of you who are not yet familiar, is an open source project that defines APIs exposing services, network services to app developers. So if you're familiar with networking, you know that there were many different layers of APIs, but those were kind of complicated and not designed to be consumed by app developers. So TM forum APIs and similar, and they kind of limited the ability of application developers to integrate better with the network and create mobile applications that are more aware of the network capabilities or able to communicate with the network and request bandwidth, quality of service, and other services. So Kamara is a project that was initiated originally by a few European operators, but now there are more than 250 companies involved, and the project just moved to a funded model. It started as an unfunded project, but due to its success, it is now a funded project with 15 initial members already committing resources to working on this project. And finally, Silva is a project that had a similar history, also started by European operators. Silva is a project that provides a reference implementation for building a telco cloud infrastructure. So as I said, it started in a similar manner as an unfunded project with a few backers from the tier 1 service providers in Europe, but it's just moved again to a funded model with actual paying members that are paying to support it and committing members to work on the project. So I suggest you take a look at that. Although the project started in Europe and is kind of maybe focusing on some of the requirements of the European Union about data security and integrity and sovereignty, I think there's a lot to learn from the Silva architecture, even if you're building a network in some other geography. And we're already seeing many of the member companies contributing to that are not necessarily only from the European Union. So I hope if you weren't yet involved in our project, I hope I kind of got you interested today. And what we would ask you all is to get more involved. And involved, I know people think about involvement in open source project as contributing lines of code, but there are so many other ways to get involved in our communities, whether it's just participating in the discussion, whether it's contributing requirements as an end user, or just participating in the discussion and contributing your technical experts. We appreciate any kind of involvement in our community, as I think, and we're seeing that everybody can benefit from any type of involvement. So don't be afraid. It's very easy to get a Linux Foundation ID as linked here, and that gives you full access to all the Linux Foundation networking and edge resources, and you're free to browse, participate, join the mailing list, join the Slack channels, and join the conversation in any way you see fit. As I was speaking at the beginning about our regional days, but we're not neglecting our big flagship event, One Summit, the Open Networking and Edge Summit. The last one happened last year around October in Seattle, Washington, in the US. And the next one is coming back to the Silicon Valley or the Bay Area. So mark your calendars, April 29th to May 1st next year. We're going to have this flagship in-person event in Silicon Valley for everything related to networking edge, but also, as I mentioned, AI is becoming a strong trend that we see across our communities, so probably a lot will be dedicated to AI as well. So I highly recommend, of course, I'm not objective, but I think it's one of the leading events of the year. So please mark your calendars and plan to participate. So if I have to kind of say just a few sentences about where we are, I think what we've seen in 2023, that it was kind of a tipping point for everything related to 5G, of course, but also Edge and IoT. We've seen things take a more serious turn and go into production, and a lot of our open source technologies were enabling that. We see, as I said, that open source is the basis for the transformation in many different industry verticals. I mentioned some of them. And we think governments and enterprises will be the driving force for the rest of this transition. And finally, I think we've witnessed that although there were undeniable challenges in the world, especially in the recent year or so, whether it's geopolitical tensions and across the globe, or even macroeconomic headwinds that kind of challenge the ability to meet in person and to collaborate, we're still seeing strong collaboration, and I showed that in the graph of participation in our project. So I think despite all these challenges, our open source communities proven to be a place where people can still continue collaboration and continue working together, no matter from what part of the world they are, what company they work for. So hopefully we'll be able to continue that moving forward. And with that, we're looking forward to both to 2024 that is around the corner, but also beyond. And we hope to see many of you continue to participate in our communities if you're already doing so. But if not, as I said, you're more than welcome to join in any way you see fit. So before we move to our next speaker, I think we may have some time. How are we doing with time? We may have 5 minutes for questions, if you like. If you don't get a chance to ask now, I'll be around today and the next following days in the Open Source Summit. So please feel free to reach out to me and talk. But if you have a quick question right now, maybe we can take it before the next speaker comes on stage.